What would you do if your family wrote your role without ever asking who you really were? Every year, it was the same performance. Thanksgiving in Barton Creek, Texas, where the candles smell like curated nostalgia and the air hums with unspoken comparisons. The table stretched like a stage, every place setting a mark for a character who knew their lines. Jared, my younger brother, always at the head, where the light hit just right. Mom Elaine playing both hostess and narrator. The rest of the cast extended family clapping on cue, ready to applaud Jared's latest mediocrity as if it were headline news. And me, I was the silent extra. The one with perfect posture and barely used silverware. Present, but not required. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that being ignored gave me freedom. No expectations meant no surveillance, but there's something corrosive about being invisible to the people who are supposed to know you best. That night, the wine was chilled. The napkins were folded like swans. The conversation was already following the script I could recite in my sleep. Elaine raised her glass. So she began that signature lift in her voice, the one that always signaled the Jared monologue was about to begin. Jared just closed on the most charming house in Westlake. 5 bedrooms, walk-in closets, huge backyard. It's such a smart move at his age. Aunt May gasped. Tessa, always performative, clapped softly. Jared gave a humble little smirk, like he wasn't expecting the praise, even though he absolutely was. He soaked it in, like sun on stone. I took a slow sip of my wine, already bracing, because I knew what was coming next. Elaine turned to me, her tone dropping an octave into her usual passive-aggressive lullaby. "Sweetheart," she said, "when are you going to finally settle down the same line? Every year." I set my glass down gently, folded my napkin with precision, and smiled. Not the smile they knew, the one that asked for approval. This one was different, sharper. "Steadier. I already did," I said. Elaine blinked, clearly off script. "Did what settle down?" I repeated, tone flat. "I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me." The fork in Tessa's hand slipped and clinked against her plate like a bell signaling intermission. Jared stopped chewing. Elaine stared like someone had missed their cue. And just like that, the performance stalled. I didn't plan to drop everything at once. No. I came to let the truth unravel naturally, like pulling a single thread from a tailored suit. Quiet, intentional, irreversible. They didn't know about the house, the IPO, the fact that I no longer operated from a rented studio with a borrowed laptop. They didn't know because they'd never asked. Instead, I had become background noise to their curated narrative. Sabrina, the ambitious loner, the one who worked with computers or something, the one who brought odd desserts and dated no one and spoke too little. It was easier that way for them, because if they really looked, they'd have to see me. Not the silhouette they were comfortable ignoring, but the woman who no longer fit the role they wrote. And roles in this house were sacred. Jared the achiever, Elaine the proud matriarch, me the unsolved riddle best left unexamined. But tonight, I'd had enough. I wasn't here to scream. I wasn't here to beg for recognition. I was here to rewrite the script with facts, composure, and timing. And they had no idea the first act had already begun. But the real silence hadn't arrived yet. They didn't erase me outright. They just never wrote me in. Thanksgiving wasn't always this sharp. There were years I genuinely tried naively, maybe, but sincerely. I thought effort mattered, that if I brought something worth noticing, they'd notice me. I used to bake, not box mix pies or Pinterest fail cupcakes, but real recipes. Almond pear tartlets with a cardamom glaze, pumpkin loaves with browned butter frosting, hours in the kitchen night spent adjusting ratios, testing crusts, perfecting texture. Elaine would glance at them like I had brought home a stray dog. Oh, how creative, she'd say, just before lifting Jared's mass-produced cheesecake out of its Whole Foods container and placing it center stage. Creative. The kind of word that sounds like praise but lands like a dismissal. Over time, I learned not to compete. One year, I brought nothing. No one noticed. Another year, I brought wine and drank it slowly while Jared talked about refinancing a car he couldn't afford. Elaine beamed like he'd cured cancer. There was the time I mentioned a project I was leading, Hale Secure Technologies, a startup designing encrypted infrastructure for mid-sized banks. We had just landed our first pilot deal, and I was buzzing with quiet pride. Elaine tilted her head and said, "That sounds complicated. Jared's office just did an open concept remodel." He picked the rug. The room laughed. And I learned something. They didn't want complexity. They wanted familiarity. Jared gave them furniture and square footage. I gave them silence, and they rewarded that by pretending it meant I had nothing to say. So I let them. They never asked what kept me up at night. They never asked why I skipped Thanksgiving 2 years in a row. Not once did anyone call and say, "Sabrina, are you okay?" It wasn't that they didn't care. No, that would have been easier. They cared about a version of me they could summarize at "brunch works too much, still single, probably fine." I didn't correct them. Not when the company raised $12 million in Series B funding. Not when we hit our first profitable quarter. Not even when we went public. Let them think what they wanted. My silence wasn't secrecy. It was armor. Because every time I spoke, they found a way to make it smaller. Every time I succeeded, they shifted the spotlight back to Jared. He was visible, digestible, ordinary in the most acceptable way. I was the threat they didn't recognize because I didn't look like one. But all that silence, it wasn't emptiness. It was a storm being stored. And this year, I brought the tartlets again, golden brown, just sweet enough, glazed with precision. I placed them beside Jared's store-bought pumpkin cheesecake still in its plastic dome condensation, fogging the lid. Elaine, like clockwork, reached for his first. Oh, how classic, she beamed. Then glanced at mine. These look unique. I didn't flinch. I didn't shrink. Because I wasn't here to be noticed anymore. I was here to shift the axis. So when she asked once again about when I'd settle down, I told her the truth. I already did. I just didn't invite anyone who doubts me. A pause, heavy and sharp, filled the room. They didn't realize it yet, but this was no longer Jared's show. Because the years I spent in silence weren't wasted. They were rehearsals. And now the curtain was lifting. Silence can shield, but the right words, they can pierce everything. Elaine blinked, caught in a glitch. "You bought a home?" she asked, like I had announced I'd moved to Mars. "Since when? Why didn't you say anything?" "There was never an opening," I replied, calm as glass. Between Jared's smart moves and sliding barn doors, it just didn't seem relevant. My voice held no bitterness. That was important. I didn't want to give them a single thing they could dismiss as emotional. Nothing shrill, nothing defensive, just facts. Clean, precise, surgical. Jared chuckled under his breath. That clipped sound he always used to shrink things, to shrink me. "That's cute," he said. "Must be a nice little condo or something, huh?" There it was, the assumption baked into every interaction Sabrina never quite gets there. She almost makes it, but not quite. I looked at him directly. No flinch, no smile. "Actually," I said, "it's a house, 4 bedrooms, detached guest suite, wine cellar, just over 200 square feet." You could feel the oxygen shift. Elaine's hand froze mid-reach. Tessa paused mid-chew. Even the HVAC seemed to mute itself. I didn't look around. I didn't need to. I let it land. Elaine tried to regroup her instincts, kicking in like an old script she didn't know how to rewrite. Well, that's certainly a lot of space for one person, isn't it? The reduction reflex, refocus, reframe remind me that any win not stamped with their approval didn't quite count. I took a sip of wine. Maybe, but it's paid off. Her fingers twitched. Jared's jaw clenched. I stayed steady. No gloating, no rising heat, just data delivered like a ledger. Elaine blinked again. "You paid it all?" "No mortgage," I nodded once. "Closed last fall, just after the IPO." Aunt May blinked like she was trying to remember what IPO even stood for. Tessa stared at her plate as if the crust of her roll could offer an escape route. Jared shifted in his chair, then smiled, a brittle, forced expression. "Why the secrecy?" he asked, voice louder now. Why keep it all hidden? Was it secrecy, I asked, tilting my head, or was it just not being asked? He didn't answer. He didn't have to, because that's what it had always been. They didn't ask. Not because they didn't care, but because they already assumed they knew enough. Elaine tried to salvage the moment. Well, Jared's home is lovely too. It's in such a desirable neighborhood. I nodded slowly, polite. That's great. So did you pay in full too? The table stilled again. That question, soft on the surface, landed like a detonation. Jared let out a dry laugh. Of course not. Most people don't. That's not really how it works, Sabrina. I smiled. Sure. Some of us just prefer not to owe anyone anything. Elaine looked between us like she was witnessing something she couldn't explain. Jared's expression flickered. Something in him understood this wasn't banter. This wasn't sibling teasing. This was the reckoning he never saw coming. What are you even trying to say? He asked, jaw tight. I'm not trying to say anything I said quietly. I'm just answering the questions, like always. He gripped his wine glass harder, the stem disappearing into his fist. Elaine placed her fork down, her voice suddenly small. You're saying you paid for your house entirely? Yes. Tessa whispered it before anyone else could. Wait. That's like what over $2 million, 2.3, I corrected, still gentle. The guest suite added some value, and the room exhaled, finally aware that something irreversible was unfolding. Jared let out a breath he tried to make sound amused. That doesn't prove anything. I didn't think I had to prove anything, I replied, but here you are demanding proof while I'm just answering. Elaine shifted in her chair. Jared looked toward her for backup. She reached for her wine. No one came to save him, and that was the shift. For years, Jared had played the golden boy, not because he'd earned it, but because no one ever asked the right questions. Tonight, I was asking, and I wasn't raising my voice. I was raising the bar. But I wasn't done yet. The illusion still had one more layer to peel. The truth doesn't need volume, just timing. And mine was perfect. Jared leaned in elbows on the table, eyes sharp. At least I didn't hide my life like some secret, he muttered, trying to reclaim ground that was slipping beneath him. I tilted my head. I wasn't hiding. I was building something none of you cared to look at. Elaine's lips parted. That's not fair, Sabrina. Isn't it? I said. You praised Jared for picking out a rug. I launched a secure infrastructure company, and you asked if I was dating anyone. The air thinned. No yelling, no storm. Just a truth so precise it cut clean through the room. Elaine's voice cracked. You've always been so distant. I had to be, I said quietly, to breathe. Jared scoffed. Sounds dramatic. I didn't flinch. Tell me, Jared, how's your mortgage? He blinked thrown. Excuse me, you said it yourself you didn't pay in full. So how much do you owe? Elaine frowned. Sabrina. No, I said evenly. It's a fair question. Since we're comparing homes' equity decisions. Jared's nostrils flared. It's fine, define fine. His jaw clenched. You want numbers? I'm offering mine. Feels fair. He glared at me, but I held steady, calm, unyielding. Elaine shifted. Jared? Okay, he snapped. I owe about $310,000. The number dropped like an anchor. Elaine's inhale was sharp. Aunt May blinked. Tessa slowly set her fork down. I didn't gloat. I didn't even blink. Credit cards, I asked, not unkindly. Jared looked like I'd struck him. That's none of your business. You made it my business when you questioned mine. He was seething, but words failed him. Elaine whispered again, softer. $300,000? I'm refinancing, Jared said quickly, defensive. It's just temporary. Like the time you took out that car loan and told us it was gifted, I asked. Or when you said your company promoted you but never mentioned that you didn't finish your MBA. Shut up, Sabrina. He said it too fast, too loud. And suddenly the golden boy costume didn't fit. I'm not trying to humiliate you, I said calmly, but you don't get to keep writing the script and act shocked when someone edits it. Jared pushed his chair back. I don't need to sit here and be attacked. I nodded once. Funny. That's how I felt for years. He stood rattled, unsure of where to put his anger. He looked at Elaine. Her hands were knotted in her lap. She said nothing. He left. The hallway echoed with the sound of his exit, the kind of silence that doesn't follow a fight, but a realization, a collapse. Elaine sat frozen, her eyes still aimed at the doorway as if he might return and restore the familiar order, as if holding still would summon the version of him she preferred. But he wasn't coming back, not as the person she thought he was. Across the table, Aunt May stared into her wine glass like it might tell her what to say. Tessa avoided my eyes, and I didn't speak, because for once the silence belonged to me, and it was enough. Elaine finally looked up, her voice small, uncertain. "You really bought that house last year?" I nodded. 18 minutes from here. Barton Creek. Her brows furrowed. "That's Jared's zip code." "I know. You never said a word." "What would I have said?" I asked. "That I moved into a neighborhood you once said was too ambitious for someone who works from a laptop." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Let the silence stretch. Let it settle. Let it speak. Because for the first time, it had something to say. And the most dangerous thing I ever became was undeniable. The house didn't change anything. The truth did. Elaine looked smaller now, shoulders slightly curled, voice thinning. I don't understand. Why wouldn't you tell us what you were building?" I held her gaze. "Because no one really wanted to know." She flinched. "It wasn't an insult. It was a diagnosis. You asked about the weather, holiday plans, whether I was seeing anyone. But not once did you ask what kept me up at night, what I was building, what mattered." Elaine opened her mouth, searching for a soft landing. There wasn't one. Tessa finally spoke, voice tentative. "You built all that?" "From scratch," I nodded. "From a $600 laptop, rented studio in Phoenix, worked nights, ate cheap, wrote every line of back-end code myself until I could afford a team." She blinked. Her expression shifted. Respect, real and raw, began to form. Elaine straightened as if she could still steer the moment. "You think I didn't care?" "I think you cared about the version of me you could understand," I said. "The one who didn't make you question what you celebrated in Jared. The one who was easy to talk about at book club." Her face folded just slightly. Not in anger, in realization. "And I don't blame you for not understanding," I added. "But I do blame you for not trying." The silence after that felt heavier than anything Jared had left behind. Elaine's voice was threadbare now. "I thought I was encouraging you. I thought Jared needed more attention." I gave her a long look. He got more than attention. He got belief. That was it. That was the difference. Jared was praised for the attempt. I was ignored for the achievement. Elaine didn't deny it. She just stared not at me, but past me, into the years she couldn't rewrite. I stood up. No drama, no announcement. Just the sound of my chair sliding back and my coat gliding over my shoulders. Elaine didn't stop me. She didn't ask me to stay, and maybe that said more than anything she could have. As I walked past Jared's now vacant chair, I paused for a breath. Funny, it looked smaller now. Like the illusion of who he was had finally collapsed under the weight of who I had always been. I turned back, eyes locked on hers, one last time. "You want to know about my life," I said. "Next time, try actually listening." And then I walked out. No applause, no dramatic music, just quiet footsteps over polished hardwood floors and the gentle click of the front door closing behind me. The air outside bit with winter chill, sharp, honest, clean, and I welcomed it, not because it comforted me, but because it didn't lie. I didn't go straight home. I drove windows down city lights, bleeding into the darkness until the streets blurred and the noise faded. Eventually, I pulled off near the overlook on Barton Skyway. Below, Austin shimmered in silence, a quiet constellation of everything I'd built. No one clapped. No one congratulated me. But for the first time, that didn't feel like absence. It felt like autonomy. And sometimes, silence isn't the lack of noise. It's the presence of power. The most powerful exits are the quiet ones, the ones that don't need doors slammed or voices raised, just truths left standing. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the motion sensor lights kicked on like they were welcoming me home, not just to a house, but to something I'd built brick by brick, alone, on purpose. My home looked the same slate gray, trim-wide steps uplighting along the walkway, but something had shifted, not the house, me. Inside, I set my bag down, kicked off my shoes. The silence wasn't hollow like the one around that dinner table. This silence was curated, chosen, clean. I brewed tea, chamomile, no sugar, walked barefoot through the space I designed myself. No open concept trend, just thoughtful lines, quiet corners, deliberate structure, like me. I wasn't performing anymore, not shrinking myself to be easier to explain. I sat down with my tea, letting the steam rise and blur the view through the window just slightly. The hills beyond Barton Creek curved into shadows, their outlines soft under the moonlight. Somewhere across town, Elaine was probably still in that dining room, hands folded story crumbling in her lap. Jared was likely pacing or plotting, trying to patch his pride back together with excuses and half-truths. But I wasn't part of that script anymore. I hadn't just walked away from a family dinner. I had walked out of a role I never auditioned for. I had handed them the mirror they'd always avoided and watched them flinch when they finally looked. This wasn't about revenge. I didn't want Jared to lose. I didn't need Elaine to cry. But I needed space. Room to let the truth breathe without being repackaged. Room to exist without constantly being reduced. For years, I told myself success was enough, that I didn't need them to see me, that the company, the revenue, the accolades, they filled the void, but they didn't. What I wanted, what I deserved, was acknowledgement that I had always been more than the quiet girl with a job they couldn't describe. And I didn't get that from Jared. I didn't get it from Elaine. I gave it to myself. Because at some point, silence isn't protection anymore. It's erasure. And I had erased myself enough. Tonight I spoke, not to impress, not to outshine, but to reclaim my narrative, my space, my identity. Elaine didn't interrupt. Jared didn't shout over me, and that mattered more than I expected. Because for once, I wasn't arguing to be seen. I was seen, and no one could shrink me back down again. I looked around my home, every piece selected without approval, every square foot earned. The lights hummed softly. The air was still. I didn't need to text anyone, didn't need to post it. There was no one left to prove anything to. I took a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. Then I smiled, not for anyone else, just for me. Because I didn't win the argument. I ended it. Have you ever had to reclaim your story from the people who thought they knew it better than you? Have you ever stayed quiet for years only to realize your silence was being mistaken for surrender? Tell us in the comments. Who underestimated you and what did they miss? Like, comment and subscribe for more stories where the underestimated rise, the quiet reclaim space, and the truth is finally heard.